A lot of women don't lift weights at all. So people say, well, aren't you afraid if women lift these lighter weights? And I said, I'm afraid of women not lifting weights at all, more than anything else.
If you've ever wondered whether 40 grams of protein post-workout is overkill or if strength training is worth the sweat, this episode is going to give you the evidence-backed answers. So we're going to start off with the first question. We're going to dive into protein, muscle, and female metabolism with Dr. Stuart Phillips. What actually happens to muscle mass in women as we age, and how is that process different or similar to men?
Yeah, great question. I've been asked a lot, when does sarcopenia, when does muscle loss start? And I've always looked for a good answer to that question. And I reached out to a good friend, colleague of mine, Stephen Heimsfeld, who is sort of like the grandfather of body composition. And he said, well, we did this study with 40 potassium counting a number of years ago. And, just to give everybody a baseline, potassium is an ion that's inside our muscles for the most part. And some of it is radioactive. So if we sit on a bed and we're really still, we can actually count these radioactive counts. And it's extraordinarily precise in what it gives you. And they did this in some men and some women of various ages. And actually, at about age 30, women start to lose muscle mass. And we can sort of talk about why, but probably inactivity and everything. And like age just begins to win. And it's about 31 in men, which, as a man who was definitely north of 31, it kind of hurt, I got to be honest. But and then it seems that women, when they enter the menopause, a lot of people talk about an acceleration of muscle loss. And really, when you look at the data, it's not accelerated if it's bends at all. It might bend down just a little bit in the early phases of menopause, but it's pretty much age-related. So women who get on hormone therapy, as an example, don't experience any mitigation of their muscle loss. So it's really about age 30, which sort of speaks to the, when do you need to start worrying about sarcopenia? It's probably much earlier than most people think.
Yeah, I know Jen Gunter put up a post recently about, menopause takes place on the backdrop of the aging process, and
Sure.
And it's not linear, right? We've got those two inflection points for both men and women, in the mid 40s, or 44, 45, give or take, and then later on in the 60s. Are you saying that sarcopenia does not experience that inflection point in the mid 40s?
It does seem to wobble at around age 45, but it does that in men and women, and I don't have a great explanation, although Jen Gunter did point out to me that there is a school of thought that around age sort of 44, 45, actually, a little bit of the aging process kind of gets turned up, and I'm not sure exactly what that would be, but men and women experience that, and they see it. And I had another person bring up something interesting to me. I never really thought about it. She was a competitive power lifter and said, if you look at the powerlifting strength curves, they all wobble around that age. And I said, you're right. I never
You're going to have to
really
talk to Jen Thompson about that. I think she's set significant world records in her 50s. I think she did another crazy...
And of course, there are always people that defy it just to make
the unicorns,
go,
yeah.
oh, okay. So there's not always, so never say never when it comes to human physiology, but the men experience it too. So,
True.
Most women lose their menstrual cycle between the ages of 45 to 55. That's about 95% of women. And when you look at the decline in that phase of life, there is no real true sort of inflection point or downward trend. It's pretty much age-related slide in normal. So I think I'm with Jen Gunter on this, that it's normal aging that's happening at the same time. And as you point out, it's not, menopause is not an on-off switch. And that, unfortunately, is what most animal models have. It's an on-off switch, and everybody goes, oh, look at this. Or there are women who experience early menopause because of surgery or some sort of chemotherapy. And that is an on-off switch, but that's not normal menopause. And so, we need to sort of be careful about distinguishing the two.
Yeah, we need to be careful about pulling too much from animal studies, as you said, because it's it's experienced differently, and then surgically induced early menopause is more that on-off switch. And if we're pulling data from those studies, it doesn't necessarily apply to the normal, gradual roller coaster of natural menopause. Let's dive into protein, because I know that's one of your big babies. You've been studying this for so long. How much protein should a woman over 40 really be eating? Because there's so much conflicting evidence again here. And I know the RDA, I don't know if the RDA has changed or not, but I know in established circles, we're kind of creeping protein up. So what do you're the expert here. How much should that 40 plus woman be eating? If her goal, and this is the contextual point, if her goal is, she wants to build muscle and lose body fat, or just preserve her muscle mass as she's, of course, doing her resistance training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the writer's statement to start off is that the RDA is too low. I base that on a number of sort of papers that we published, but I mean, it was established using a methodology that was really designed to offset a minimal or a deficiency. And so the recognition that intakes above the RDA, which is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, I just haven't changed it. So unfortunately, the RDA hasn't changed. I used to think that was sort of a career goal of mine, but
to change the RDA?
I've given up. Yeah. No, it's not going to happen. It's like it's as if it's sort of chiseled on some tablets somewhere. So it's not going to happen. So we've just pushed back with evidence, and I think sort of moving up, it's at least 1.2. I think that's kind of the basal level of buy-in, and that's 50% above the RDA. So there's not a lot of nutrients that I would say, you know what, they're 50% wrong, and you need to go higher. But 1.2 is where I think everybody should hopefully be. And then as high as at about 1.6. And, in deference to a lot of other people that talk about intakes that are higher than that, I think from the evidence that we and some others have generated, that intakes above 1.6 gram per kilo, or about 0.7 grams per pound, really begin to diminish. So that's the sort of ceiling that I tend to talk to people about. And I know people recommend higher. I just think that the evidence to show that it does something for you, particularly from a muscle building standpoint, isn't there.
So did you change your position from your 2011 paper when you were looking at optimal protein intake for athletes?
Yeah. I know people don't like that, but that's kind of how science works. We had some ideas at that time about the impact of protein that suggested even higher intakes were beneficial. Subsequent experiments and studies that we've done have just shown us that really that's not the case. So I know everybody calls it flip-flopping, and I'm like, well, that's science, right? And if you don't trust your own data, who's you going to trust? And everything that we've got sort of says that at about 1.6, it begins to plateau out. Now, it's not that you can't squeeze a little bit more benefit out at intakes that are greater than that, but it's pretty small. And for most kind of mere mortals out there, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, I think probably two pushbacks are going to be, one, do we have a lot of studies of like high-level athletes that are doing extreme cutting for shows?
Right.
And then the other one probably is going to be there is that individual difference, and we're looking at plots. We'll see a cluster of plots that a cluster of data points around what we would be pulling for the average person, but you'll always have those outliers that are like really below or really high, and is that data that we want to throw away, or are those instances of people that are hyper responders or hypo responders?
For sure. And one of the things that we've probably done that's a bit of a disservice is we've used study level data and means to try and derive this relationship. And I think to your point, when you take individual data points, we can see some examples of people that really do benefit from higher intakes. But I can also see examples of people that, at lower intakes appear to be doing just fine. So, it's the individual study level, I think, data or individual patient data, whatever you want to call it, that is probably the data that's going to kind of crack the code on this. And, it's still individualized. And so we're getting to the point where those types of recommendations, there's always flexibility, and I'm not so rigid but I like I said, 1.6 for most folks out there, pretty good. A little bit higher for some extreme athletes. I get it. Or if you're cutting, totally get that too.
And dietary preference. I think that's great for coaches like myself because it gives us that flexibility. And we're always looking for the edge. Adherence when it comes to achieving a physique goal is always going to trump everything else. And if you have somebody that's struggling with protein and we can go all the way down to, 1.6, then that gives us the flexibility to be more nuanced in our approach to, dovetailing someone's macros or diet to their preference. Because adherence at the end of the day trumps everything. What about the buzz around the 40 grams of post-workout protein? What do you have to say about that? Is that based on strong science or is it misapplied?
So we've contributed to the noise, the argument in this space, and we said for a long time, and I need to get something absolutely crystal clear. Everybody says, well, Phillips group said you can only digest 20 grams of protein. And we have never said anything about digestion, ever. So you can digest a ton of protein, and I mean a ton, 100 plus grams, okay? No, you can digest all of that, no problem at all. You go and eat the 32-ounce T-bone at the Outback Steakhouse, it's all good. It's what you do with the amino acids that come from that protein that's the key. And, from our perspective, and several others did dose response studies where, at about 20 to 30 grams, it kind of levels off. And this is muscle protein synthesis, or the use of the protein in muscle. And then my good friend and colleague, Luc Van Loon, and Jorn Trommelen, who was Luke's student, who I was on Lauren's PhD examination committee, so I know him very well, did a study where they showed that 100 grams of protein nudged up protein synthesis a little bit more than 25. And so, everybody was like, oh, see, 100, it's better than 25. And I'm like, yeah, but just remember, that's 120 and 25, and this is the 100 gram, this is 20. What if they tested a 40 gram dose and it was in that range, and lo and behold, it was no different than the 100. So, don't get me wrong. I think that maybe it's a bit higher than the 40. Probably for bigger people, definitely they could use more. But for most of what we've got out there, I think that dose sort of plateaus at close to around 30 to 40 grams. You could digest a ton of protein. Can you use it? And the question is, even the Trommelen paper shows that it's not like it keeps going up and forever, despite the title of the paper that there is no upper limit. There's not even their own data can show them that. But so I think I'm still, 40 grams is doing a pretty good job. And most people tend to eat in discrete meals. I know that there are one meal a day people, but for the most part, I think 40 grams per meal occasion would be good.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thanks for clearing that up. And I guess let's go into the last question around protein. What is, in your opinion, the biggest mistakes that women are making when it comes to protein and training?
Probably not eating enough for the most part. I mean, I think that a lot of women believe that they have a good idea of how much and the ones that are dialed in and judicious, no problem. But on average, when we collect diet records from older women in particular, or middle-aged women, we find that a lot of them are creeping around the RDA, mostly because they prioritize, particularly at the first meal, so the breakfast meal of the day, carbohydrates, and they're missing an opportunity. I think that's a patterning meal, and Don Layman has sort of intimated that this is an important meal to sort of turn on protein synthesis. That should be a protein, heavy meal, and maybe some of the protein that you're eating at the end of the day should be in the first meal of the day to kickstart protein synthesis and get it going. So I think for the most part, that's the mistake that most women are making. A lot of women have got it dialed in because they've got their diet records, they know what they're doing and everything else like that. But most just not hitting their protein targets because it's the daily intake that matters. That's the big variable. And, meal servings, yeah, but across the day, you should be hitting, at least 1.2 and up to 1.6.
Yeah, I think again it comes back to adherence, and I know working with gals, especially in our improvement season where it's a little bit more, loosey goosey. I hear from a lot of my gals, life happens, and by the time they get to meal 3, they're behind. And so trying to get all that protein in at the end of the day, especially if you're eating a good amount of food, it's like it gets impossible to do again and again and again. So just when we think about successful habits, dosing it out more frequently throughout the day so you're getting your fiber in every meal and you're getting some of that protein in every meal, not trying to backload and scramble, that's probably what we're looking at. And I'm a big fan of macros simply because it teaches us what's in our food. And when we think of like a protein-centric meal, I had for breakfast, I had 30 grams of protein today. You know what I had? I had 4 slices of Ezekiel bread, and I made this great, it was French toast. So I've got my eggs, I've got my milk, I've got my, little bit of collagen in my collagen is an incomplete, but it is a source of amino acids and protein, right? And I stack it up throughout the day with all my other proteins. And so it's, I turn something that could be just carbs, but I craft it in such a way because of macros that I end up hitting my protein.
And you can tell by the way you're talking about it, you enjoyed it too. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've forgotten a little bit. We focus on nutrition a lot, and I'm like, I don't know. For me, eating is an occasion, and food is to be enjoyed, right? So, everybody's like, oh, I got to blend all this stuff, and I'm like, that's awesome. But at some point, I hope that you sit down and you make a meal, you enjoy making it, you enjoy eating it, and at least maybe you enjoy eating it with somebody else as well. That's so totally. I think that those are some things. I'm like, I think that's really important, as a part of life, right? So
let's dive into strength training, because this is another place where you have a ton of expertise and a lot of hot topics circling around the internet, especially social media, with heavy one-liners, really kind of hyperbolizing what women must do, or the muscle's going to fly off their body, and you're wasting your time if you don't do this one thing. So, what does the science really say about what builds muscle and strength for women over 40? What can we say?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I've recently pushed back on social media against the message that women or anybody to achieve results with strength training have to lift heavy. And, I kind of thought that we had got this message straight because we've shown for years now, not just our group, but in several meta-analyses, that lifting lighter weights, and everybody goes, well, what's heavy and what's light? So the usual prescription is 80% of 1 RM. That's that 8 to 12 rep, to fatigue zone is the sweet spot for muscle growth. In our work, and lots of others have shown that actually that zone is, really wide, up to, say, 25 reps per set. But it's the perception of outward effort, or fatigue, if you want, that equalizes those two things. And so when you get and lift to fatigue with a heavier weight or a lighter weight, let's say 30 to 50% of 1 RM, you get the same muscle growth. And everybody says, well, you get stronger when you lift heavier weights. And I'm like, that's because you practice lifting heavier weights. Like, if you want strength, then by all means, you should lift heavy stuff. And then a lot of people have sort of jumped on and said, and it's the only way you gain bone mass. And that's not true. It's just not true. So, and I've said it several times, and people have said, but, and I'm like, okay, I've got to make a post on that one, clearly. But it's the only way you to activate your satellite cells. And that's not true either. So, all of this needs to be needs to be separated out from it's sufficient in that it happens, but it doesn't need to be that way. So I think the data on participation in strength training. It's miserable, right? So a lot of women don't lift weights at all. So people say, well, aren't you afraid if women lift these lighter weights? And I said, I'm afraid of women not lifting weights at all, more than anything else. And then within the nuance of the prescription, you can create progressive overload, not always through load, but through more volume, so greater sets, number of frequency per week, et cetera. And you can get results. It may not be at the tip-top optimum end, but that doesn't mean you need to lift heavy. Need would mean that if you don't do this, nothing happens. And that's just not true. So again, we fought this battle with men. And gradually, the Brad Schoenfelds of the world and other people who said that's not true, they did their own work, and it's like it works. And it works in men. So my point is it works in women as well. And we have data to show that. It's not like studies haven't been done in women. So
I'm going to tease out for the listeners. And again, we probably have some people that don't have a good grounding in training, and then we'll probably have a whole bunch that we're preaching to the choir. Like they're all about maximizing and optimizing. But
Sure.
that there's the spectrum of people that are, need to get started with better habits if they're going to enjoy the aging process at all. And we want to be respectful of that. And the science says, at least how I'm interpreting it, and you're here to correct me, that I actually was just listening to Brad Schoenfeld at the Glute Lab last month. It was just an absolute legend. Yeah, him and Aaron and Alan Aragon. And it's the different rep ranges, right? So we're getting away from this, like you can only be in the 4 to 5 rep range, or even in the 8 to 12 rep range. And it's like, hey, actually, we can be in all of these rep ranges. The caveat being, most of us are going to be successful. I think it was 30% of what would be our 1 rep max, whatever that means for the layman. But, if you're going less than 30%, you probably, in terms of the ROI, it's not going to be a lot. And then the other piece being, you do want to be matching that rep range with your ability to push close to failure. And so we can get into, I don't want to mislead people and think you can lift, 5 pounds for 3 years on end and see growth, right?
Right. Yeah, there's a limit, and probably 30%. So, to put it in real numbers, let's say you can lift 100 pounds. And so the recommendations would be take 80% of that and lift 80 pounds. And most people can lift that, and most lifts between 8 to 12 times before they go, I can't lift it anymore. And what our work and Brad's work, and even Brent would agree on this as well, Brent Contreras, is that lighter loads, as long as you move towards fatigue or failure, then you get the same growth results. Now, strength doesn't improve as much. But if we take an unpracticed task, so get everybody to go do something that they're not sort of been practicing, everybody gets as strong. So it's not even strength is the main issue, because the muscle growth is there, the benefits are there. Like if you really want to get the last part out of the cloth, if you're a power lifter, don't get me wrong at all. I'm not going to tell anybody who just, is going to clean and jerk or snatch or deadlift or bench something once, this is not the way you want to train. But if you're a bodybuilder and if you want physique, and I'm not going to use the word tone but if you want to hold on to some muscle, then lots of loads from a range of as low as 30 to as high as probably 80 to 90 work.
I think it's so good, especially for the 40 plus, because we do have, for a lot of people, osteoarthritis. We have things happening with the spine, especially the lumbar spine, the cervical spine, and it's great to have a range of reps that you can train in and maximize gains. If we're thinking of progressing a lift for the long term, we don't always have to progress load. And then I'm just going to tease out once more, you said some other important things. Like there's many ways to progressively overload. I think there's like 10 or at least, right? And I'd love for you to repeat that for the people that are listening, because yes, we want to push ourselves. We want to train hard, but we also want to look at our joint health. For some of us, that's going to be more important than for other people. And biomechanical issues that certain individuals might have, and being safe, especially with things like hip hinges or even squat patternings. Are you pressing through all three corners of the feet? Are you going into your toe? Like, are you practicing safe lifting?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. You hit on a point that I think this sort of crystallizes on, and the idea is to present a menu of options to people who maybe they don't lift, and it's like they've watched something on Instagram and someone says you need to do it this way, and you think, oh well, actually, first, I don't really like lifting weights. I don't want to go to the gym, and actually, I don't want to do that at all. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you could try something lighter, and it's so that, it's the entry level. How do we get people into the gym? How do we get people to enjoy this? How do we get people to enjoy success so that there's some mastery and they feel that there's a self-efficacy to go and do it by themselves, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that coaches know, when they're talking to people about how to establish habits and patterns. And it doesn't have to be load. Even though it says overload, it could be more volume. And you can progress by doing more sets, or you could take it from 1 day a week to 2 days a week, or you could change the exercise, or, you could go from a machine to a free weight. And all of these things change recruitment patterns and provide a novel stimulus. And that's really what keeps the progression going, is
both
something
physical and mental, right?
Right. And as soon as you can lift 10 pounds and you're like, oh, well, I can do this like a lot of times. Well, now lift 15. And so challenge yourself that way. Or lift the 10 pounds, but do it twice, or put it down. Don't rest for 3 to 4 minutes, rest for 30 seconds. And so there's so many variables in strength training that you can change, that everybody talks about, prescription. And I always ask, compared to what? Like, you can compare heavy loads to, going for a walk, and heavy loads look awesome for lots of things. But there's still benefits of going to a walk, but I mean, they're not comparable. So when we compare lighter loads to heavier loads, lifting to fatigue or high effort, everything kind of comes out in the wash.
Could you, speaking about the benefits, right? Could you talk a little bit about, things like metabolic function, insulin sensitivity, mobility?
Yeah. So we've tried really hard, my group here, to push a narrative that is, everybody's perception, particularly the clinicians. We've got so much work in the aerobic field that it's like it's sort of at the pinnacle, and it's like there's nothing aerobic exercise can't do. Don't get me wrong.
I remember you
I do
posting
aerobic work.
A win about cardiovascular benefits. You're like, yes, resistance training now is
Yes. So even the American Heart Association says it's good for your heart, your cardiovascular health. So I think the perception, it used to be, it was like, cardiovascular is here and weights are here. Weights make you big and strong. Cardiovascular does insulin sensitivity, it does this, it does cardiovascular health and everything. And actually, when you look at the health benefits, they overlap a lot more than they are dissimilar, in which case it sort of speaks to, exercise is good per se, but if you want to be strong and you want to maintain independence, and I think as you age, then that's the domain of strength and power. If you want to be cardiovascularly fit, and, that's lots of benefits associated with that, that's going to be more aerobic, HIIT, that type of stuff. But I got a good friend, mostly online, named Drew Bay, who's down in Texas, and he constantly reminds me, he goes, I can make your resistance exercise workout a cardiovascular challenge. And, you caught me this morning. You were spot on. I just finished like a body weight circuit, and my heart rate at the end of it was up 160 beats. And, I have a hard time hitting that on a bike. So, kudos to Drew. He always reminds me of that. So if he's listening, shout out, Drew. You got me, man. I get it.
Yeah, I think, again, in the coaching world, and we rely a lot on cardio for the fat loss phase of our athletes getting on stage, especially
Sure.
those that don't start with a lot of calories, like they don't start with 3,000 calories, and they're trying to get down to ultra lean condition. You don't want to be dieting somebody on no food, so let's
Right.
contribute through cardio. And it's always interesting to see how cardio just gets shunted back and forth into all of these, like, it's terrible, it's going to ruin your gains. And I love the work of Doc Alice. She's like, are you kidding me? Like, look at my
Yeah,
athletes.
yeah.
She's an endurance, specializes in
Yeah.
endurance training
Yeah.
and kind of hybrid training.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, like, gosh, you think the soccer players and basketball players and football players of the world are ruining themselves by running up and down the field? Again, we just get so black and white and chasing these crazy ideas that something has got to be, except for smoking, right? It's got to be bad for you.
Yeah. Smoking, hands down, or intravenous drug use, not a good habit. Break that immediately. But from the standpoint, and I have a good friend 3 doors down, Marty Gabala, who's Mr. High Intensity Interval Training, and he ruined days off for me because I used to say, I've only got like 20 minutes. I'm just going to pass today. And he showed me. I goes, oh no, you can do these high intensity work. You can even do it in the stairwell. And I was like, oh, bugger. Okay, so that's and so those things are really good for your heart and your lungs, but movement and mobility and strength and ultimately power, the ability to get out of a chair, get across an intersection, in and out of a car, whatever it is, that's the domain of being, of lifting weights, basically. So if you're not doing it, you should start. And if you don't like gyms, find something at home. There's lots of online videos and bands or body weight, those sorts of things. I mean, entry-level stuff. Get in and start doing it is really the message.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, to close, what would be, if you could give every woman over 40 one tip, what would it be? Other than just start lifting weights, because you just said that.
Yeah, sure. I'll say this. Like, I think as we age, I often remind women that on average they outlive men in the United States and Canada, almost everywhere in the world, by on average about 4 to 5 years. The data we have here in Canada, I don't think it's dissimilar in the States, is that almost 75% of women will spend that time in full-time institutionalized care. Like they'll be dependent on somebody else to live, right? And my mom is one of them. My dad died several years ago, and she lives in a place where people help her. She's not completely dependent, but that's where she lives, and so. It's not a bad quality of life, but most people want to age and be in their own home for as long as possible. To me, the key to doing that is strength and power. And so think, it's like compound interest, right? And so when do you want to start? Well, the message is as early as possible, but if you haven't started, you want to think about something that you're going to put in the not the longevity bank, because I think longevity is great, but who wants to live to be 120 and feel like they're 120, right? It's not my goal.
Quality, right?
But health span. Health, exactly. The quality of the time that you're here. And I think mobility, physical mobility is key to that. And so your ability to be strong and have some power in your legs, your glutes, and your upper body to push things over your head, that's what's going to limit you, and it's going to determine at some point your quality of life. So if you're a woman over 40 and you're not getting stronger, you should start.
Lastly, anything you want to flag, any red flag that you're like, man, this has got to die. This is just not helpful for women.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are out there. I think people need to drop the word need from their vocabulary when we're discussing anything to do with fitness or being physically active, and unless there is truly evidence that it's a need. And it sort of crystallizes on this whole point about you need to do it my way, and my way is this way because, well, I said, and that's my way, right? And, again, not to be disingenuous, but I don't have a book to sell. I don't have, programs to promote. I just do research. So when I look at the research, the need to do any one thing, that's a tough hill to die on. And the most of the data shows that actually most evidence is that exercise always exists in terms of benefit on a dose response. So yes, there are some things that get better, but if somebody's doing nothing, that's from nothing to something is the big change or the drop in risk or the benefit gained. And so I just think people need to be a little less dogmatic about, what people need to do, and get out there and do something is always the message. Once you've mastered that, then more of something and the more specifics of the something, yeah, that's fine. But the need part is greatly overstated and overplayed, in my opinion.
Yeah. All again for that, to ride that algorithm. But I think, I hope it comes from a great place to get people inspired. But I love your position. You're incredibly inclusive, and you think of the broader population and how crucial it is to be very inclusive to people that need to get started from ground zero, right? Something is better than nothing.
Thanks for that. It's my students that constantly challenge me to think about things in a different way. They're really the inspiration for a lot. Everybody goes, "Oh, you've got these ideas," and I'm like, "Well, I've just talked about it in a lab meeting. It was a PhD student came up with that, not me." So I bask in their reflected hard work and great thinking.
Where can our listeners find more of your work? Where would you point them to?
So I've given up on Twitter. I think it's really gone downhill, but I'm
no Twitter?
MacKinProf, M-A-C, or X, sorry, MacKinProf on Twitter, Instagram. I am the same on TikTok. I don't really do well on TikTok. It really is only there to frustrate my sons, I'll be honest. But I'm on Facebook as well, smp.phd, and on LinkedIn as Stuart Phillips.
And you've got a lot of publications. I think you have a lot of them, or at least recent ones, on your Linktree, right? You use Linktree on Instagram?
Yeah. Yep.
Great. All right. Thank you.
I try. It's all managed by me. I don't have anybody else helping me out. I crush my own plane. So if there's something wrong, it's definitely my fault.
That is fabulous. Good for you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a voice of science on social media. We need more people like you and Jen Gunter and, Lauren, Dr. Lauren, and just telling people.
She's a good one.
Yeah. Nuance is everything. Yeah. Context is everything. Think critically. Be careful of, people trying to sell you something. If it sounds too good to be true, take a pause. And it just really, honestly, I appreciate the work that you do so much. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Appreciate it.